I was in the library, the usual Sunday afternoon hum of whispers and turning pages around me. I had my phone out, scrolling through old family photos, my comfort zone, just seeing us all, acting normal. There was one from last summer, a barbecue in the backyard. Dad, Timothy, was at the grill, a plate of burnt-looking burgers in one hand, tongs in the other. Mom, Helen, was laughing beside him, and Ethan, my brother, stood there, flexing his biceps for the camera like the idiot he sometimes was. I smiled. That day, it felt so real. But then I zoomed in on Dad. Strange, I mumbled to myself, almost unheard over the library's gentle background noise. I was sure his apron had a green dinosaur on it, not this bright red thing with King of the Grill printed across it. I furrowed my brows, swiping at the screen, as if that would change the image. Must be misremembering, I concluded. My mind plays tricks on me these days. It was just a small, dumb detail. I moved on, pushing that tiny flicker of unease away. It wasn't important. A few days later, I was sifting through my spatial storage, my little pocket of nothingness, just tidying up, getting rid of things I thought we'd needed but didn't. Things from the dreams. We called them dreams. Collective nightmares, really. About the end of the world. Stupid, I know, but we'd all had them, and they felt so damn real. So we prepared, or we tried to. I pulled out an old silver lighter. It had a distinct scratch on the side, a jagged little line where it had obviously been dropped on concrete or something. Huh, I said aloud, because sometimes talking to myself helps. I thought I only had one of these. And then it happened. Another lighter, exactly the same silver, same distinctive scratch, rolled out from a shadowy corner inside my space. It clattered against the other one. It felt cold against my palm. Not just cool like metal, but wrong. A cold that seeped into my bones. Just bought too many, I guess. Forgot about the spare? I tried to make sense of it. Or maybe Ethan borrowed it and just tossed it back in here when I wasn't looking. He does that sometimes, leaves his stuff everywhere. I put both lighters into a small box, telling myself it was nothing special, just a pair of lighters. But a prickling sensation crawled up my back. We were all at dinner that night. Dad was talking, trying to explain it all away. The dreams, I mean, the ones where the world ended, where they came. He talked about shared subconscious, mass hysteria. Mom, Helen, looked pale, her fork pushing at her food. She was mostly worried about our mental health. Timothy, maybe we should see someone, she'd said that morning, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan, though, my brother, he was already drawing maps, planning defenses. He was always the practical one. I just sat there, nursing a glass of water. I took a sip. My throat felt tight. And then, as I set the glass down, a chill ran through me. I heard it. My own voice, crystal clear, right there in the room, saying, "I'm full." The exact same words I'd just spoken, maybe 2 seconds before. An echo, but not like a room echo, more like a playback. Did I just hear my voice repeat? I asked, my own voice a little shaky this time. Everyone looked at me, puzzled. Or am I just imagining things? I shrugged, tried to laugh it off. At the same time, the old radio on the kitchen counter was still quietly playing the news. The announcer just finished a sentence about a new flu, but his voice, his actual voice, lingered, like static. The last few words, new flu, they drew out, distorted, humming in the air long after he'd moved on to talk about something else, as if the sound waves themselves needed to catch up. Like a faulty recording. Dad gave the radio a sharp tap. "Bad reception, I guess," he muttered. But his eyes, they darted to Mom, and I saw a flicker of something in them. Tension, real tension. No one spoke for a moment. Just the quiet hum of the radio and the sound of my own heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. That cold prickling on my back hadn't left. In fact, it had intensified. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. How could I? After the radio, after the lighters, after my own voice had betrayed me. It wasn't just vague memories anymore. These were physical things, tangible, or, well, audible. I got out of bed, padded over to my laptop. The radio had mentioned a new flu. Maybe that was it. A precursor, a sign. God, I hoped not. I typed quickly, my fingers fumbling a little on the keyboard. New flu virus outbreak. But as I typed virus, something strange happened. The search bar, it started to autofill. Not with what I was expecting, not with my usual search history. Instead, a series of phrases I had never, ever typed popped up. Ancient entity, memory parasite, recursive death. What the hell? I tried to backspace, to delete them, but they just reappeared, flickered back. My mind raced. Is what I'm searching being controlled? My heart pounded. It felt like someone else's thoughts were bleeding into mine, or worse, someone was guiding my fingers, pushing me towards something I didn't want to see. Maybe even something I wasn't supposed to see. That old, cold sensation from the lighters, it was back, but this time, it was in my head. The next morning, I was still shaken. I stumbled down to the kitchen. Dad, Timothy, was already there, hunched over his iPad, probably reading some obscure science journal. Helen was at the coffee maker, the smell of fresh coffee doing little to calm my nerves. I needed something cold. I walked over to the fridge, pulled the handle. On the freezer door, stuck there with a tiny magnet shaped like a melon, was a small note. Scrawled in pencil, it read, "I'm always watching, Olivia." My breath caught in my throat. I stared at it. It was my handwriting. My exact loop of the L, my specific way of crossing the T. There was no mistake. But I had no memory of writing it, none. A scream felt like it was stuck in my chest. This wasn't some vague echo. This wasn't a faulty computer. This was me, my own hand, used, without my permission, to write that message. A message that felt like a freezing cold finger pressed directly against my brain. I ripped the paper off the fridge door and crumpled it into a tight ball, my fingers trembling. The cold sensation lingered on my fingertips, phantom and real all at once. My blood ran cold, spreading through my veins like poison. It's in my head, I thought, the words a silent roar inside me. It used my hand to write. It was a violation so profound, it made my stomach drop. We were all trying to keep up appearances, you know, just go to work, go to school, do normal things. But it was a fragile act. Helen and I had been out in the garden earlier this week, weeding, trying to get some vegetables planted, pretending like the world wasn't a hair's breadth away from falling apart. I'd seen a rose blooming then, a deep velvety red. I'd plucked it for a vase inside. This red, it's a bit off, I remember muttering. This shade, I remember it being fresher somehow. Helen had looked up from the soil. Red is red, dear. What's wrong? I'd just shaken my head, carried the flower inside, told myself I was crazy. The light was bad. Anything. But now, coming back into the kitchen, the crumpled note still burning a hole in my palm, I saw those cheap framed photos on the fridge again. Our family picnic last year.
Ethan, smiling wide, a smear of barbecue sauce on his chin. For a split second, a flicker, really, I swore I saw a streak of vivid red, just like the rose, flash across his face. It was gone as quickly as it came. And then, a whisper. Not words, just a low, dry sound, like paper rustling against bone, right inside my head. Like something was being scanned, fast. That feeling of being watched, it came back with a vengeance. I dropped the rose, what was left of it anyway. Its petals scattered on the tiled floor. My heart was galloping, a frantic drumming against my ribs. I had to know. I ran, my feet pounding on the floor, towards the living room, where Dad was still on his iPad. "Dad," I cried out, my voice shrill, breathless. "Dad, do you see anything strange on TV or online? Anything at all?" I stared at him, my eyes wide, begging for a rational explanation, for anything but what was in my head. This wasn't just me. It couldn't be. Dad, Timothy, was always the logical one, the engineer. He didn't believe in ghosts or premonitions or any of this shit. He was in his study, a big computer monitor in front of him, lines of data jumping across the screen. He was poring over meteorological patterns, anomalies, satellite feeds, anything to make sense of the growing weirdness. He trusted numbers. We all did in him.
Mom, Helen, stood beside me, her hands clasped tightly together, her face etched with a fear that matched mine. Ethan was outside, I think, checking the barricades, tightening the bolts on the reinforced doors. He wasn't here for this part. "Guys, look at this," Dad said, his brow furrowed, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "The temperature in that desert region, it shot up, I mean really spiked, in just a few hours. But the satellite data..." He trailed off, pinching the bridge of his nose, and then his voice, his own voice, echoed from somewhere in the room. A dry, distant sound, repeating the words, "satellite data." "No way," Dad whispered, more to himself than us. "It must be a bad connection, faulty wiring, something." He spun around, started checking cables behind his desk. But just then, the massive computer monitor, the one filled with all his graphs and numbers, flickered. And then, a line of stark white text appeared, replacing all his logic. "Thinking you can trust numbers? A foolish logic, Timothy." I gasped. Helen buried her face in her hands. That was when the house's old speaker system, the one Dad had installed for news alerts, for weather warnings, crackled to life. It wasn't Dad's voice. It wasn't a news anchor. It was a voice, mechanical, devoid of warmth, empty. It boomed, reverberated through the whole study, through the whole damn house. "Emergency alert. Satellite data has been corrupted. Do not trust the numbers. Do not trust what your eyes see. Only emotion is real, and your emotions are delicious." It stopped, just like that. The speakers went back to a soft, almost imperceptible hum. Dad stood there, frozen, his face ashen. His belief in logic, in science, it shattered into a million pieces right there in front of us. It knew his name. It had read his thoughts. It had twisted his numbers, seized his own goddamn system to deliver its message. And it wasn't just a message. It was a sneer. A horrible, mocking, hungry sneer. That night, sleep was impossible. Again. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, at the faint glow of my nightlight. My mind raced, images and sounds from the day flashing behind my eyelids. The red apron, the identical lighters, my voice echoing, the radio dragging, the weird search results, that note on the fridge, Dad's screen, that voice. It made my skin crawl. I closed my eyes, just for a second, and then a word. It bloomed in my mind, vivid and terrifying. Outbreak. I knew it. I knew what it meant, but I couldn't grasp its meaning, not fully, not yet. Downstairs, Timothy's old radio, the one that had echoed earlier, sputtered. Its faint hum died down, then blasted on, full volume. The sound tore through the quiet house, ripping through the fragile pretense of safety. A frantic, panicked voice, a news anchor, his words garbled but crystal clear enough to understand. A situation out there, lost control. I repeat, this is not a drill. I was out of bed in an instant, running down the stairs, fear propelling me forward. Dad and Mom were already in front of the living room TV, their faces pale, bathed in the harsh, flickering blue light from the screen. The city, our city. It was chaos. Fire, smoke, people screaming, cars abandoned. And then, Ethan. He stood by the front door, already in his military uniform, backpack slung over one shoulder, his face grim. The living room window, it was open. I hadn't noticed before. A cold gust of wind blew in, rustling the curtains. And with it, a smell. Bleach. And something else. Something metallic and burnt, like scorched wires and rotting flesh. The smell hit me hard, overwhelming. A smell I knew. A smell I had repressed. A smell I remembered vividly from my dreams. The smell of an apocalypse. Outbreak. I whispered the word. It wasn't a dream anymore. It was here. The hum of the emergency lights was a thin, high whine that never really left our ears. It had become the soundtrack of our lives, weeks after the world outside had fractured. We'd shored up the house, turned it into, well, our little fort. I was in the living room, the one with the boarded-up windows, trying to read by the unsteady beam of my flashlight. Reading felt like a defiant act, like I was clinging to something normal, something quiet. The book was a tattered old paperback, some romance novel I must have shoved into my space ages ago. My fingers traced the words, one by one, a desperate ritual.